Hello everyone again. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on wherever you are. Today we have quite a busy agenda. In fact, today's webinar is hosting Catherine Litter from WHO. And she's the co-lead of Global Health Ethics team. And I would like to thank her for sparing some time for us in her very busy schedule, I know. And as Francis said, she has to leave at the end of the hour. So I think we'll do our best to fix in the minutes that are allocated to us. So we are going to first start with Catherine's sorry, I just lost my hand. Okay. Catherine's presentation about the role of ethics review in preparedness and response during public health emergency. So after we listen to Catherine, we'll have 4 distinguished presenters who are going to respond to this presentation. The first response is from Professor Monica Afkan-Floyan, and she's going to talk about what has COVID-19 meant for our local ethics committees in Nigeria and one African perspective. The second response will come from Professor Valeria Sokolik, and the topic is preparing ethics committees in Belarus and Eastern Europe and Central Asia for the challenges of COVID-19 and future public health emergencies. The fourth response is from Dr. Palmero, and she's going to try to find an answer to the question: are ethics committees or IRBs were placed to respond to the needs of patients, communities, and science during public health emergencies? And the final response is from Dr. Vasiliki Natalie Rahimzadeh, and the topic is pathways to cooperation between ethics committees and IRBs during public health emergencies. And as usual, we are going to have a comprehensive summary from Dr. Lawrence, which I'm looking forward to hear. So I think we can start with Catherine, if it is okay. And I would like to pass the floor to Catherine.
Thank you, Ali, for the
introduction.
And thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here, see so many familiar faces and also new ones. Can you see my screen first and foremost?
Yes, we can see your screen.
And you can hear me clearly?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes,
okay, so hopefully I'm not going to speak for too long, because as you heard, there are 4 great speakers after me, and I'd really like to hear their reflections. I'm going to try cover in the next 10 to 15 minutes 2 to 3 areas. One is the guidance that WHO developed at quite early on in the COVID pandemic on guidance for ethics review committees. Secondly, some work that we, WHO, have had with our ad hoc, the establishment of our ad hoc ethics review committee for COVID. So us actually putting into practice the guidance we developed, and really to talk about some of the challenges and issues that we've discovered in that process. Then I want to make a quick reflection on what's going on at the national level, although I think we're going to hear some regional and national perspectives to follow. And then I'll just finally finish with a few reflections, which are really food for thought for this discussion going forward. So the first thing I want to really sort of set the scene for, I think, and everybody here is probably familiar with, is really the articulation of the arguments that we've had around the need for rapid review. And I think it is always an important starting point with any audience to re-articulate these as you have these discussions and develop guidance and processes. But clearly, what's happening is an intensification of existing ethical issues. I'm not sure that many people would argue that they bring to the fore new ethical issues. It's really an intensification without we have, especially in the COVID at the beginning, there were no treatments or vaccines. So it really is, there is an ethical imperative to do research, and there's an ethical imperative to do it at a pace that responds to that. So really it's on all of us who work in ethics review to have those processes and mechanisms in place. Clearly research must be embedded in response efforts, but we all can acknowledge that countries that are very different places, both in terms of research capacity to respond, and that trickles down also in terms of different levels of preparedness for rapid review. Some lessons have been learnt from past outbreaks, and hopefully I'll start to speak about those, but I think we all at the beginning found ourselves in charge of ethics review committees at very different places. I think the key that I've been thinking about, yet haven't really managed still to put into practice, is really this, I'm going to call it a cycle, and that is the preparedness. So I'm a firm believer now that I'm still chasing my tail instead of work in terms of work, but I'm a firm believer we should be starting to think about preparedness for the next outbreak. So what are we learning from COVID that needs to feed into our research and our response for the next one? And the particular area clearly that we're talking about today is review. So what can we learn from what is happening in COVID that we can take forward now but into the next outbreak? Lessons from previous outbreaks that we at WHO have been involved in and focusing on. Obviously, the time sensibility and sensitivity issue, the quality of the review versus the time taken. And there's no magic bullet for this. This is really a learn and practice. But I think we're getting better at it. Clearly that overall the ensuring of the protection of participants has to be at the forefront of our mind, and that there's a balance to be struck. Clear things coming out is the need for the rapid sharing of data from research. I think Zika really brought that to the fore and has followed through in Lassa. And we are learning a lot about it in COVID, and there's still a lot going on in that field. And I'm not sure, in terms of our review of data sharing, how much progress we've made, but I think it's a great area for reflection. So a lot of the work that really sort of started in earnest started before I arrived at WHO, and that started with a WHO alert workshop, which took place in Senegal in March 2018, which was on the back of the global summit that was held there, Global Summit of National Ethics Committees. The other area where these recommendations came out of was a meeting brought together in Abuja in Nigeria in October 2018 to think about ethics review in Lassa fever and beyond. So really some of the key findings of that alert WHO workshop that have carried through into our guidance are really national SOPs for ethics review. These should be in place, or should have been in place really at the beginning of COVID. We haven't done a review to see how many national ethics committees had these in place, but I think that would be an interesting piece of work. Pre-review of protocols, how much information can you have already there in the system ready to go? How many discussions can you have before the actual review or protocol comes to an ethics review committee? Lots of regional multi-country emergency ethical considerations. How do we bring these together? It's not just about what's going on in one country. It's often, and as we see particularly in COVID, what's happening in a region, but also what's happening globally, and how do we bring all that together? And real need for coordination between stakeholders, between the national ethics committees and national research committees, with regulators, with public health officials, really to move a lot of this forward. As I briefly mentioned before, data, but also sample and benefit sharing. These are discussions that are now at the forefront that weren't 5-10 years ago, that I do think when we're thinking about review, we have to think about these elements. And a particular one that especially came out of Ebola, but followed through into Zika, lots of issues to do with the ethical management of biological samples and what that looks like in MTAs. So moving us now to really the thinking that's gone from those workshops into the development of the WHO emergency SOPs for this. So this is the guidance for research ethics committees for rapid review. A very catchy title, I haven't even said all of it, but this was produced by the WHO working group for ethics and COVID, which came out of the R&D blueprint early on the outbreak. So first meeting, I think, of this group face-to-face, when you still had face-to-face meetings, was early February. And this was one of the primary tasks that the group thought it needed to work on. So they worked on it between February, and it was finally published, I think the version that's on our website currently, and I can put a link in the chat to that actually when I finish talking. That was finally published in May. And this really is, it's about an 8-page document, and it's procedural. It's a lot about, you know, the things to think about when you're trying to put in place these mechanisms, the timeframes, all those sorts of lists, the checklists, the number of people that you should have in quorum. So it's a very detailed discussion on key considerations for how you set this mechanism up. And as I said, we ourselves at WHO use this guidance as the backbone for us to establish our COVID ad hoc committee. So it says 20 recommendations really to facilitate rapid review. And I'd be really interested to know from people on the call how many people have referred to this document, or you know, is it time for us to rethink it on the back of COVID? Are there gaps now that we've had this for 9 months in practice? So that's something for us to think about, but great area for discussion. So the key recommendations are really the surge capacity issue. So to pre-identify the member roles with specialised training. If you've got an ad hoc committee or a subset of your committee, look for a quorum of around 1/3 of members. Flexible review arrangements, it seems a funny thing to say, but I think at the beginning, a lot of ethics committees were still operating in paper format, were still operating in face-to-face format. That's now very much changed. Looking at shortened time frames. I won't go through the whole list, as I said. I will put the link in so people can look at it. Obvious things like communication documented and archived, but not at the expense of having informal discussions, because I think they actually help to move things forward when you actually speak to people about applications. Thinking about review timeframes and how and why we've been able to adhere to these. So really we were looking at a timeframe of sending out to reviewers within 24 hours of submission. Is that realistic? Very interested to hear. Reviewers to complete these within a timeframe of about 3 days. And then a overall consideration. So these are recommendations of really doing the whole process in around 5 days. And then a fast, prompt response from the PIs, ideally no more than 48 hours. And I know that's been really tricky for us in terms of some of the huge adaptive trials that have come to the committee. Meeting some of these timeframes have been really complicated and difficult to do. Easier for the smaller ones, clearly. So moving on from the guidance development that we put out, I'm moving now, as I said, I just want to talk from my experience of having established the ad hoc. When we had the West Africa Ebola outbreak, we did actually expedite processes in the WHO headquarters ethics review committee. But we didn't set up a separate ad hoc committee for that outbreak. We made a decision quite early on that we thought we should do this and approach the DG, because the Director General WHO has responsibility for the headquarters ethics review committee. It's worth knowing, so all applications, all research studies that are either financially supported or technically supported by WHO staff either need to go through a regional office or they will need to go through the WHO headquarters ethics committee. So you can imagine we get a lot of different types of applications, but just for all to you know. So really the discussion started in March. In July, we had already had applications, been through them and set up a weekly schedule of meetings to push forward with that. In terms of what it looks like, this new committee, so we had 7 members who are only from the new committee. We took 4 members from our pre-existing committee and invited them onto the ad hoc committee. The new members and all the members, we deliberately got a mix of both specialised bioethics training, but also infectious disease training, people who'd been involved in past outbreaks, research in outbreaks, and also had been reviewing on different ethics committees in past emergencies. So a wealth of experience. As I said, the reasons for doing this, really, we had an increased volume of submission. We wanted to put together a format where we had flexibility and responsiveness greater than our current turnarounds for our normal ethics committee, and really to increase the expertise to look at it. On the right-hand side of your screens, you will get a rough idea of the variety and scale of the different types of applications that have come through this committee. I understand that to date, I think we've had around 100 varying applications in discussion or submitted, a lot of them expedited, some of them exempted, and some of them big multi-country, multi-study ones that have come through at least 2 or 3 times because they've got adaptive arms. So that's really the model. The key challenges, I guess, for some of these smaller studies, we insist on independent scientific review, and they haven't all had that. And really finding and creating a mechanism to do that quickly when people aren't used to getting that for some types of smaller studies. I think there's within our rules, so I'm interested in how other people have dealt with a tension between the existing rules, which were first put together in 2012 and have only been slightly amended since, so they were not put together for an emergency situation. So really, the tension between the pre-existing rules and the applicability to those in the context of public health emergency. I think the burden, I cannot underestimate the burden on the committee and the secretariat to meet expectations in terms of turnaround times when we've had peak submission periods. On the whole, we've managed to meet them, with the exception of 1 or 2 periods where we've just been totally overwhelmed, or we've had unbelievably complex trials come in. Confusion because we have, as I said, got our pre-existing ERC, which is looking at non-COVID studies, but a lot of the studies have had to come back into the committee because they've had to amend their study because of COVID, and they belong in the normal COVID and not the new one. Complex governance structures of some of the large trials. So some of these multi-sponsor, multi-country, multi-site, multi-continent have been really hard. There's been papers to get through in this shortened review period. And then variabilities in response times as well, which haven't helped us meet some of the targets and some of the interaction that's hard to build in that you need when you've got such complex. So that's really our experience. What have we learned? What are the successes? I think we've really tried to be more personalised and more direct with people, get on the phone to them, talk to them as soon as possible, answer any queries earlier. It's highlighted, I think, for us where we could potentially make some improvements in our normal processes, and we could maybe even operate in a faster process without losing the quality. I think it's helped us have further discussions of alignments with the way our regions work, a lot of discussions with PAHO and AFRO because they have a really exciting model of AVAREF, which I'm hoping, I don't think I've got time to talk about, but hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss that. So what are the lessons going forward? I think this trust building exercise, we talk about it in research, but I think we need to talk about it in research review. I think it's critical. I think when we put that in place, it's been a smoother process. And it's, as this said, reduced misunderstanding and helped us improve our turnaround times and troubleshooting. Things get lost in translation. And I don't just mean actually in translation, because we are actually translating some of the materials from local languages into English. I mean in translation via email or in translation in memos. I think there's been a greater awareness for us as a team working together, both with our technical units, but our regional colleagues. So we've got a few outstanding issues. As you can see, we've still got to work on our streamlining and alignment and automating our systems. We had to take some of our reporting mechanisms out of our normal system and put them in a new one. But overall, it's been a really valuable, worthwhile experience. And I think despite the teething problems, I think we've learned a lot that we can take back into our normal review. And I think I would argue that we haven't sacrificed the quality with the expedited mechanism, but that does come at cost to the people who are on the committee and the secretariat. There have been long hours spent trying to meet these targeted review times. So I'm only going to talk quickly here, but I talked a lot about what we're doing at a global level. something that's really struck me, especially when we held the 13th Global Summit of the National Ethics Committees. So this, for those of you who have been involved in these meetings in the past, they're held every 2 years. It was meant to be face-to-face in Portugal in March, and we postponed it to 2022. So we changed track, had it online, and basically changed the whole topic to looking about what national ethics committees were doing in COVID. What were they working on? And this was, as I said, in September, and we had 12 different national ethics committees talking about their work from all WHO regions. And I was just stunned at the amount of progress and thinking that had gone into both ethics review, but also a lot of the ethical issues. The point I'm trying to make, I think, is for me, as someone who's working at the global level, how can I really, and how can we as a community learn from many of these national and local level initiatives and build those into some of our global practices and guidance? And I'm just going to finish now. I think I'm coming to the end of my time with some food for thought conclusions. These are my personal reflections. I think there still exists a huge confusion of the interplay between ethics review mechanisms. So we are reviewing at a global level. We're often reviewing things that are done at local level. People still don't understand the need for both. Is there a need for both in certain circumstances? It's an interesting question, but I think there's especially these questions arise in COVID when we need to get through protocols quickly. I think where we've got multi-sponsor, multi-country studies where you have got all sponsors reviewing the same study, all countries reviewing the same study, it gets even more confusing, and there's got to be better models and mechanisms for doing it. I know the AVRF model where they bring the countries together to discuss so that the discussion's done and all the questions can be asked in the one place, and then the National Ethics Committee take the decision-making back to their committee. I think that's a really interesting model that we should look to learn lessons from. I think saying that there's an important need for us to think about these mutual recognition models. There's definitely a place for them. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done thinking what exactly they look like. And I think one of our speakers, I'm hoping, will say a bit more on that. And then quality assurance models. I know we have FWA and recognition of ethics committees, but I think we have to do more on this. My colleague at WHO, Andreas Rees, is leading some work looking at indicators, developing indicators for local, institutional and national ethics committees. Can we develop a list of indicators we can agree to that helps people identify a functioning, well-working ethics review committee, which would allow us to recognise that committee, and maybe even our legal colleagues might be happy to recognise that committee. So part of this work in developing indicators is not just working with ethics committees to develop them, but also working with our regulatory teams so they can start to recognise them, but also legal colleagues. So the final point on that was the engagement with legal departments. And I think that's really important in the sense that a lot of the reasons why we can't recognise other people's review is often to do with risk and legal agreement. So I think if we are going to move forward with more of the recognition model, we really have to engage legal colleagues. The value of preparedness is critical. I think we do need to start thinking in real time about learning lessons from what's happening in COVID before we look at it with that retrospective lens, which I think is a different lens. It's an important one, but I think we need to think about it in real terms, both in terms of the processes. What are the process issues? Is a 24-hour turnaround feasible in your context? If so, why? If not, why not? Those, the basic process things of what we can learn and do better, but also the substantive issues. We're seeing new and evolving models of research coming through our committee that we're not with the level of expertise, 100% well placed to review. We are learning on the job, real-time research review. So how can we start training and having more seminars about these? Adaptive trial designs are a key one that I'm really conscious of and that I think we need to work on. And I think as part of our WHO work and work of the FEPRA network, they'll do work on that as well. And then the final point is really how can we build on this great work that's coming out at different levels and really systematize the change. So a lot of change is led by an individual committee. How do we bring that in so that it's more systemic? And that goes back to the preparedness question. And that's really, I'm really interested in this increased connectivity that I can help with between the global, regional, national level. So I'm open to engagement. I'm open to ideas within the constraints of a very busy workload, but very, very welcome to hear from you in this discussion. Really interested in vehicles for knowledge sharing. As I mentioned, the Global Summit, they're going to have regional meetings this year, really focusing on this topic, but there's lots of other meetings that we need to highlight, both formal and informal. And finally, I just want to bring everyone's attention because knowledge sharing, I think, is critical, and knowing what's out there is critical. And the FEPRAN resources database on the Epidemics Ethics website has now got, I think it hasn't quite hit 2,000, but it might be 1,995 or something like that, references on COVID and ethics. And that includes National Ethics Committee statements, guidance, academic papers. So I would encourage people, if they are looking to learn from others, that's a great resource as well. And I will stop there. I hope I haven't gone over my time. And thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This was a really great presentation. Sorry. You touch key issues for discussion of the group, and thank you for highlighting the guidance of the WHO developed early on the pandemics and the recommendations for rapid review and ad hoc for COVID-19 and the key challenges. I couldn't agree more about your sentence on how pandemics intensify the ethical issues in health, which challenge the sustainability of health systems and integrity of science during this public health emergency. I think the lessons going forward you talked about is one of the most important items of your presentation, and I think we will all would like to discuss more on this. And the snapshot of what's going on at national level was also mind-opening for most of the group, I believe. And finally, the systematizing the change in what we have all, systematizing the change is what we all have to think about and share our knowledge and our expertise and our experiences during this public health emergency. So thank you once more for this comprehensive, great presentation. Now we can move on to the responses, and the first response is from Professor. The first response is going to come from Professor Monica Akang-Floyan, and the topic is yes, what has COVID-19 meant for our local ethics committees? One African perspective. Yeah, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to share my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Thank you. And in 5 minutes, I hope I can do this in 5 minutes or less. I would like to share my perspective in terms of what COVID-19 means for local ethics committee. What you would see I have done is expanded not just to Nigeria, but I'll be sharing the result of a project that we did and reporting on what happens in West Africa. So the lesson would be expanded beyond Nigeria, would learn from West Africa in general, and I would share some of my insight into what is happening in Nigeria. I would like to start with this reference from the Global Health Network and Community Engagement Working Groups, the link which Catherine just shared, which noted that a surge and an increase in COVID response would leave ethics committee overwhelmed, and Catherine did identify that. It also would make working in difficult situations and facing challenges of reviewing the study with limited evidence of safety and efficacy of intervention being proposed. And I think these are realities that many countries' ethics committee are facing. So briefly, I'll share the report from the WATERS project, which is an acronym for West African Task Force on Health Emergency Research. It was a group put together during the Ebola epidemic. And so we got grants from OSIRA, and in collaboration with the West African Health Organization, which is the health arm of ECOWAS, we decided to work in 6 countries in West Africa, 4 French-speaking countries and 2 English-speaking, namely Senegal, Guinea, and Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Ghana. And the project's aim was to address capacity need to review COVID-19 related protocols. So we divided the work into 4 specific tasks. One is to identify country-specific gaps in terms of the competency to review protocols, and based on the identified gap, we'll develop a curriculum, then train the national IRBs or ethics committee, and they would step down the training. So as our date we've done, we've addressed the first 2 activities, which is identify country gaps, and we have developed a curriculum. We will be going on to the next. So I will be sharing with you briefly the results that the results of gap analysis that was done. So we did, the first finding that struck me was that of the 6 countries we worked with, 3 were very prepared. They had documents in place, they revised their national code, Nigeria developed a sub-code. And what was common to the 3 countries was that those 3 countries were affected by Ebola. The other 3 countries did not experience Ebola. So it's clear that having a pre-experience of a pandemic or an epidemic kind of prepares you ahead, or you're in a better position to respond to a pandemic. What also we noticed was consistently across the countries, ethics review had moved online. Many of those other countries used to do face-to-face, or they had to submit hard copies, but everybody had to go online. And review, maybe rapid is the word rather than fast track. And there were ethics committees, just like Catherine noted, that committee members felt burnt out in real time because they had to do more than was usual, and this was latched on their routine work. Some ethics committee noted that many researchers had to stop, and these were those that could not transfer their work online. And a few things that they noted was that they had to learn new rules of engagement with online research conduct that they were not routinely familiar with. And one that was very consistent was how to receive parental consent for adolescents and adults that now have to take online surveys. In the past, you had to have parental consent for children up to 17 years. Now you're moving to online surveys. How do they have to tackle change? Or the issue of reimbursement for data. I mean, you go online, you're not expected to incur costs for participating in research, or you now go online, you use your data to do research. How do you ensure that those data are reimbursed? And that for many, a few would have to still continue in the field to collect data. And the issue of PPE access to whom, for whom, how limited, how much also becomes a challenge. But then this was needs identified, and I think this is my last slide. This is the summary of the needs that we identified in the analysis. Many felt that researchers as well as health professionals need training on COVID. It was a big gap, and that may otherwise reflect in the things they do. Do appreciate that ethics committee members will have to refer to researchers also to help review. So all the review is not done in-house. Or you need the competency of this persons who are going to who are researchers themselves, who have to submit protocols, as well as researchers who they would have to refer to help with guidance. They're not up to date. One of the things we found on the field was that none of the ethics committee, none had undergone any training. I did also ask from Kenya. This is West Africa. Kenya is in East Africa. And they also noted the same, that none had specialized training on COVID. And so what the knowledge they're using is based on what they have acquired or learned in other spaces. They also identified the need for improved communication between stakeholders, that this could better their response. And as Catherine referred, you find that IRBs work independent of regulatory agencies, as you've seen the second to the last bullet, and they think that a lot more synergy between all stakeholders involved. And you also find that the ethics committee do not conventionally get a call through to researchers and ask. That phone conversation is not a conventional way of relating, and that might be a shift that is needed even going forward. They did identify the need for more local trials to be conducted around the pandemic. There were very few local relevant prevention and treatment research going on. They identified the need to develop procedures for researchers during the epidemics, procedural SOPs that enable researchers work within the COVID that would also improve their own ability to make such recommendations when they're reviewing protocols they thought was needed. Very much needed is exchange of information on best practices in the region. This is missing, and they would love to have this. And a question that was raised, I think, by one or two ethics committee is how IRB is expected to conduct monitoring roles during this pandemic. And finally, a few did identify that they're now identifying new vulnerabilities, new vulnerable populations, and COVID-19 survivors was one, healthcare worker also. That's a new vulnerable population that this epidemic has shown up and they have to deal with. On that note, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to present and looking for questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And now we're moving to the second response from Professor Valeria Chokolik. And the topic is preparing ethics committees in Belarus, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia for challenges of COVID-19 and future public health emergencies. So Professor Valeria, are you here?
I think she sent a message that she has problem with the internet, and I apologize that she won't be able to join. There was an earlier message sent.
Okay. I didn't see that message. Was it in the chat or in the email?
I think she sent an email to Francis and he posted it in the chat.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So I understand that she's not here, so we have to move on to the next response, and to Dr. Palmero about the ethics committees and IRBs, if they're well placed to respond to the needs of patients, communities, and science during the public health emergencies. So Dr. Palmero, yeah,
hello.
We can see you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you perfectly.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here sharing my experience from an American or Latin American perspective of what is going on with ethics review. I will turn off my camera because I'm also having some issues with the internet.
Okay. Okay, sure.
Okay. So I was asked if the ethics committees or IRBs are well placed to respond to the needs of patients, communities, and science during health emergencies. And from my perspectives of lessons we are still learning here in Latin American countries and how to strengthen ethics reviews during the pandemic, and I will share with you some of the challenges we need to face to advance ethics review for outbreak response. Even though Latin America had experienced previous epidemic outbreaks, such as the Zika outbreak, ethics committees were not prepared at the beginning of the pandemic for an outbreak response. There were not emergency mode procedures. A lot of research was also arising in our region. This situation of uncertainty and also the lack of experts for advice were one of the most difficult issues we had to face at the beginning. However, with all these problems and the existing economic constraints that they were also exacerbated during the pandemic, ethics committees were able to adapt their review processes for a rapid and a rigorous ethics review. We have experiences of some countries where health authorities have established different strategies to streamline ethics review by creating ad hoc committees at national or subnational levels to review the COVID-19 research. And other countries have created mechanisms of coordination for ethics review among the existing committees. And in other countries, committees themselves adapted their processes without any guidelines from health authorities. So there's a big difference among countries and where their ethical review situation was at the moment of the beginning of the pandemic. Also, it's important to note that for this purpose of adapting the processes of ethics committees, the support of PAHO's document and also WHO's document was very important. Some guidelines were developed for ethics review procedures, and also regional meetings were made to share the experience of all Latin American countries, and not only among members of research ethics. There were also the participation of researchers and health authorities. And now I would like to share what I think are the current ethics review challenges and what we need to work forward. I will share a slide. Can you see it there?
Yes, okay. We can see your screen. Yes.
Okay. In first place, I think the process is to enable efficient communication and harmonization of criteria and cooperation among regs, among research ethics committees need to be enhanced, and also with regulatory authorities and health authorities. Without these efficient communications, research ethics committees are left alone, and there's no possibility of advancing ethical research during the pandemic. Also, we need mechanisms to foster collaboration between researchers and committees during the development of protocols and throughout the entire conduction of the project. And this would allow to facilitate data sharing and also the access to benefit for the population. We need a collaborative partnership, not only among countries of the region, but also within our countries. You know, they should be partners for this one end, which is to benefit people during this pandemic. Another of the issues that we've seen that there are a lot of challenges in the region is with the supervision and the oversight of ongoing research, particularly because of the rapid development and of evidence, and how we can continuously review the social and scientific value of the research that is ongoing in our countries. Another of the things that I think we need to work on is the community engagement and to develop community engagement strategies to address public concerns and expectations, and also to give them access to clear and reliable information about research, about what research is being approved and what research is being rejected by research ethics committees. What is the role of the ethics review and all of the work that the committees are doing during this pandemic. I think we need to benefit from the fact that research is on the spotlight during this pandemic. We need to start telling the community the importance of the role of the research ethics committees and what is it that we do, we actually do. And this at last, and I think this is the most important issue we need to resolve in our region, is how to give a formal recognition to the work of the committees by the authorities, by the health authorities. And in first place, to do this, we need resources. This is a problem that is not just for the response of the pandemic, but we also need this on ordinary times, and we need a recognition of ethics review as an essential part of the national research systems. Okay, that's all, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Palmero. And now we're going to have the last presentation for today. It is going to the title of the presentation is Pathways to Cooperation Between Ethics Committees During Public Health Emergencies, and Dr. Rahimzadeh is going to present this topic. So. Doctor, can you hear us, Dr. Rahimzadeh?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
All right, I am going to share part of my slides as well.
Okay.
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am Vasa Rahimzadeh, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics. And I am presenting some preliminary findings from a report that I've just completed with funding from the World Health Organization, Health Ethics and Governance Unit, on ethics review, mutual recognition, and multinational research collaboration in pandemic settings. And this report presents findings from an environmental scan of the empirical and gray literature that I conducted on ethics review, mutual recognition. And it identifies some of the chief barriers and opportunities for implementation to accelerate multi-site and multinational ethics reviews during the public health emergencies, obviously, of course, during COVID-19, but in specific in low and middle income countries. And this was from the perspectives of many of the members of the ethics working group of the COVID-19 Clinical Research Coalition members and their affiliates. And so really to date, most high, middle, and low-income countries have established these administrative bodies such as research ethics committees, institutional review boards, research ethics boards. They're termed, differently across the world, to essentially protect the human rights and the welfare of research participants. Yet really the regulatory and the institutional environments within which these bodies operate vary quite considerably across the world. And so advances in communication and computation have really dramatically improved the ability for researchers to collaborate, but haven't necessarily resulted in parallel improvements to collaboration across research ethics committees. And this pressure to collaborate has really been catalyzed by fields such as genome sciences and biomedical fields in which more data and greater sample sizes fuel the big data era in healthcare innovation. So this growing empirical data also shows that an institution by institution approach to ethics review can be redundant, it can be costly and inefficient, especially when that pressure is greatest, such as during public health emergencies. And so what this report tried to do was scan and provide a landscape of the policy debate of ethics review, mutual recognition, which we've defined as this system of multinational and multilateral ethics review and approval, in which the decisions of a competent, qualified research ethics committee in a sponsoring country are recognized by local research ethics committees in a host country based on shared procedural standards. And this idea was originally proposed in the data-intensive genomic sciences, and which this report looks into and investigates across stakeholders in low and middle income income countries during the pandemic. And I have a slide for you here, just giving an overview of that consultation process. So it's of course, more work to be done, but there were 11 one-hour consultative meetings held across different stakeholders by individual meeting, webinars such as these, presentation Q&As, and email correspondence. I have another slide here showing the distribution of those consultative activities just for your information. And I want to spend the few minutes I have to discuss some of the main highlights and findings. So first, successful implementation of this multilateral, at present hypothetical system of mutual recognition really rests on two conditions. The first being determining a procedural equivalence among research ethics committees, and secondly, establishing reciprocity among them. And the findings from the environmental scan, as well as the consultative activities, suggested that the first of these conditions, i.e. developing procedural standards, can plausibly be met based on the great uniformity and overlap we see across research ethics committees worldwide, and the international guidelines that have been codified for research ethics reviews. So these are broadly followed, and suggest that procedural component could be met. But really, in talking with the consultees, that the main chief barrier and at present an intractable barrier to operationalizing ethics review mutual recognition happens to be that lies at that second condition, establishing reciprocity. And I found that really neither the urgency for nor the increased volume in multinational research collaboration during this time significantly lowered this barrier. And so what I was able to do also through my conversations is find that a lack of conceptual clarity on the protective roles between local research ethics committees and perhaps centralized committees. We heard from Anna Palmiro about some of the centralized
I think we lost. Can you hear us? Dr. Vasiliki, can you hear us? We lost your voice. Yeah, I think it's because of her internet.
I think we lost her.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, I was just hoping to hear her voice. That's why I was asking, but I think we lost her voice.
Have I returned?
Okay. Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
It's just to increase the drama of the presentation. Yes, so the regulatory environments vary greatly and present this major regulatory challenge to operationalizing this model. And really, if pursued, the scalability of a model like this would require, at a minimum, equal representation from research systems with highly integrated as well as newly developing infrastructures to establish this type of reciprocity. And I wanted to just quickly put up this slide, but I won't go into depth as some of the action items and calls to action that the international community might pursue to begin to lay the groundwork for such a system as research in the future really leaves collaboration imperatively low, but should be facilitated even at the governance level. I wanted to quickly just make a plug for an extended version of this presentation that we'll be holding. We're currently in the planning processes for, and it will be a co-hosted presentation by FEPRIN as well as the COVID-19 Clinical Research Coalition and the Health Ethics and Governance Unit, presenting an in-depth version of the results that I very quickly gone over here, and the date and some organizing structure details at the bottom there. And I'll leave up my thank you slide. And I really appreciate Francis and all of the organizers for inviting me today to share this work.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So this brings us to the end of our presentations today, and I think now we can go to the discussions part. And before doing so, unfortunately, Catherine had to leave. So I was hoping to have some minutes to, so that we could ask her some questions, but as she said, she had to leave at the end of the hour. So unfortunately, we lost her, but we still have our other presenters and speakers with us. And so we can now go to the discussion part. But before doing so, may I kindly ask you to click on the raise hand button so that I can see that you have something to say or ask, and so that I can give the word to you in order. If you go to the bottom of the page, you'll see the reactions there, and there is a raise hand button, something like this. A funny thing appears on the screen, and so that I can take notes and give you the word in order. Okay, so the floor is open for discussion. Any questions, comments, ideas, thoughts?
Well, Alif, I will try to say something.
Please
if
go
no one
ahead.
else will. This group has never been so quiet and well behaved. It's very scary. Yeah, I thought the presentations were great. And I thought the presentations are really challenging us to try to think how we can, especially what Dr. Vaso says at the end. I mean, that's a good place to end for me as well. Like, how are we going to go forward, across national lines with ethics review? And that seems to be, I'm stuck. I'm really stuck at how to get there. But I think this is something that the pandemic and other epidemics have really highlighted. This is something we are able to do from time to time. We've seen this in Africa from time to time in an ad hoc manner. But ad hoc is probably not the best way to do these things. So going back to where we started, from where we ended, back to Catherine's talk, this preparedness is essential, I think. It's really essential. And one more thing is, we cannot do this preparedness after COVID. We will not do it. We will never learn from COVID after COVID. We have to learn now. So I feel there's a kind of urgency in a way as well to take the lessons from today before we lose those. So thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I completely agree with you. We are in the middle of the pandemic, this public health emergency. We are doing and we are learning at the same time. And we have to take note of what we are learning to be prepared for the next public health emergencies, which will come. We know that for sure.
I wanted to add quickly to your comments, Francis, that as part of putting this report together, I've read and spoken to many people who have been part of regional conversations to centralize ethics review, meaning, reviews across national lines, as you say. And there are some tremendous examples that can be used as just that, a case exemplar of how one might scale a centralized model outside of regulatory and national borders, particularly among countries and among regions that share social, cultural, and certainly linguistic similarities. It has, perhaps in regulatory theory, these countries have developed very similar approaches to ethics review, and starting to find those threads of similarity both at the regulatory level as well as local practice. There is very sound foundation on which that could be built. So I think in some of the conclusions of this report, I write about areas in which that could be very strong. That sort of collaborative spirit is very strong, certainly among organizations like PAHO, who's having regional discussions at least, and collaborating across research ethics committees at the national levels, and some of your colleagues in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and in the Ukraine, in Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan, who are main key stakeholders at the policy level, are collaborating and dialoguing with each other to sort of embrace this kind of reciprocity and regulatory similarity at the get-go. So we are not totally lost. There are really exceptional examples of this already happening. It's merely ways to scale this up.
Yes, Dr. Kebede, Senate Kebede, please.
Yes, I would just like to bring to attention that, yes, we're doing a great work in terms of advocating and working on guidelines on ethical issues and preparedness when emergency appears. There has been good work, and still we're having so many movement. But at the end of the day, I think it becomes very important to make sure that it is institutionalized and national structures are working towards that. It's good to have regional, global entities working on ethics and giving us guidelines, but unless it comes down to national levels, and then we change the culture and the attitude with which we are approaching ethics and working on ethics, I think it becomes very difficult. We know that the population is not homogeneous. Even if we have a regional guideline, it becomes very important how to translate those ethical guidelines and use them at a local level, understanding the local cultural context and also all other dynamics to make sure that we have a very good ethical practices and we are really implementing what is expected of us. And I think it becomes very important to elevate this discussion to make sure that we are reaching higher policy decision makers to institutionalize it at their national levels. I think that's one of the things that we need to think about, how to make sure that ethics becomes really a culture and a norm in our medical schools, in our research schools, in our public health institutions, and at national level, with all its dimensions to be implemented at all times. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this comment, really. As far as I can see from the reactions, I mean, we all appreciate this. Thank you. And the red heart from Mirza.
So there, if I could just jump in again.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I think what Vaso is saying and what Senait are saying are both true, and both true at the same time, and that's difficult. We have to get something. I mean, there has to be an international discussion and international activities. But the real thing that happens with ethics committees is always inside the country. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's inside the country for so many reasons, But I do think that Vaso's report has given us a launching pad to start to think about this really difficult question that has to come up. And I think it doesn't take anything away from what Senait is saying. In fact, it helps Senait. So if we take Ethiopia, where Senait is a professor, then we can see in Ethiopia the structure of those ethics committees and so forth would benefit from discussions with Uganda, or would benefit from Africa CDC and Evergreen what they're doing there or what the WHO is doing. So, and I think Catherine also pointed it out in her presentation too. The global discussion benefits from what's going on at the local ground too. So the best practices we find are going to be the practices that exist in places like Chile or Brazil or Turkey or in Japan or something like that. So that's where we're going to find our best practices. And these things, somehow they have to come together. We need this interactive dialogue. We have to push into the local community level, local national level for the ethics committees. And we still have to have something going on at the international level to make that work.
Yes, thank you, Francis.
I don't know if Elena wants to say something from the perspective in Russia and with your collaborators in the CIS countries there.
Oh, now I can say only about Russia, because we are going to talk with Valeria Sokolchik, who is from Belarus. But as I know, she has some problem with communication or this internet, I don't know exactly. So I hope next week or maybe tomorrow, not sure, maybe we try to connect with them, it's member of Belarus committees, and discuss our opportunity to work together. About Ukraine and some other country, I can't say something now. Maybe we try to connect with you, Francis, this Alexander, and try to discuss our opportunity to work. Of course, I received your mail about our colleagues from Turkey, and we will connect with them, of course. Now we translated all survey, and hope next week we try to do pilot research, and maybe not next week, maybe the week after, the next week we try to do it on 2 ethics committee, National Russian Ethics Committee and some IRB committee. And thank you for a great presentation. For me, it's very interesting, and I think it's need to share these materials, this different colleagues in different post-Soviet countries, because it's really heuristic materials, really.
Yeah. So thank you, Elena. I'm sorry to go on, Alif, but one more thing I wanted to, if I could.
Please go ahead.
I think it's part of this discussion here. I mean, with Anna saying, with what Vaso is saying, Catherine is saying, one of the things that is in Vaso's report is a registry for ethics committees that could take place at some place like the WHO, so that we would have an overview of that, I guess. And I was talking to Dr. Farrar from Pakistan earlier today, and we were talking about the importance of being able to map, just to know where the ethics committees are. So as Elena mentioned, we're doing a survey now to try to see how ethics committees have coped during the COVID-19 period and what we can learn from that. And one of the problems that we have, of course, is we don't know where all the ethics committees are in the world, or we don't even know where they are in our own countries. So I think one of the steps that can take place is a kind of mapping or so, or maybe a registry might be too strong a word at the moment, but a mapping at least. And I know a couple of attempts have been made, but I think it's a big project, and it would have to be an ongoing project. So it's a complicated thing, but yeah.
Francis, I don't see anybody else asking for the floor, so I saw Dr. Palmero. Okay, please go ahead, Dr. Palmero.
Thank you. I would like to add that I think it's necessary to also engage in this kind of initiatives, the other stakeholders that are part of all this process, and maybe with researchers and technical units. At last, it's just one result. We need to have research done. We need to have research done ethically and rapid. So maybe we need to get another step and start doing initiatives like this with researchers and health authorities, and find some ways to engage them so they get to know what we are doing. What I see in my country, in Argentina, and also in the region and many other countries, that sometimes our own authorities do not know what research ethics is about. So that's a big problem. And these kind of initiatives, I feel that we are all learning, but this is just our field. We know what we have to do. We are identifying our difficulties, but we have to take another step and inform all these situations and all these challenges we are facing with our authorities at national level and also international level. I think maybe that's some other opportunity we need to explore during this pandemic.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but Anna, what is the next step then? What's the step that we're missing? Because you're right, we're talking about it a lot. We think we're working on it a lot, but what's the next step?
I think we can start doing these seminars or this information, dissemination, and start inviting our own health authorities and the regulatory authorities. And I think we also need to know what they are thinking and how they see us, and what are the problems they also identify, and that way we can improve and enhance this communication, this effective communication we need between all stakeholders.
Let me ask Professor Ida, I didn't warn him, but let me ask him, because we both have gray hair now, but Professor Ida was, he was early in this discussion at the global level, or early in, from our point of view sometimes anyway, about ethics committees and about how an international collaboration can take place. Dr. Ida, do you want to say something about how you see this discussion evolving from, let's say, around the period of the late 1990s, 2000s until now?
Well, I have been a little remote of bioethical discussion and in particular research ethics committee issue since I have been president of a national university for already 5 years. However, I remember I was a member of ethics experts in Ebola disease pandemics. And we first thought of the use of compassionate use of unregistered interventions, but such an idea was not accepted by the committee, and instead we arrived at a new system, what we call MURI, M-E-U-R-I. It means monitored emergency use of unregistered and investigational interventions. It means that the I'm wondering if really in the pandemics of emergency, the research or clinical research ethics committee is working well in many countries. For example, in Japan, I didn't heard that here that the ethics committee in different hospitals are working for using new unregistered interventions or new vaccines trials and so on. And I think that Japanese people think that in the pandemic emergency situation, life precedes the ethics. That is the Japanese people's, I think, thinking consideration. We often discuss in a way that this is a question of balance between urgent treatment and ethical requirements. That is a very difficult question to answer. It is true that we should always think about ethical review when we meet when we face a new pandemic disease and so on. But well, I think the problem depends on the a kind of national considerations or emotional considerations, if I say, because this is life and ethics one contradictions.
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Ida. Yeah. I want to ask, put somebody else on the spot, Professor Sorensen from Sweden, because I think the Swedish, the Nordic ethics committees have some experience collaborating, but still, even in the Nordic countries, I mean, the Nordic countries are maybe the earliest group of countries to actually come together in through the Nordic Council, I think, to really collaborate in clinical trials and so forth. Let's say GCP has its origin there to a certain extent. So, Professor Sorensen, to put you on the spot, do you want to say something how you see collaboration going forward in ethics review?
I'm not sure if you're talking to me, but I am Robert Sorensen from the United States, and I'm actually listening in and learning a good deal. I'm working on a book on research in the midst of a pandemic, which includes ethical chapters. But I'm afraid I can't tell you very much about what's happening in the Nordic countries. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. That's a faux pas.
Quite all right.
My apologies. But thank you for being here nonetheless. And good. Okay. Let me ask Dr. Menenkoff, Jerry Menenkoff at the OHRP. He's the head of the OHRP in the U.S. If there's any authority that has oversight of the IRBs in the U.S., it's them. Jerry, from your position, looking out over Washington and across the Atlantic, what do you see as a possibility?
Thanks for bringing me in on this, Francis. I mean, the discussion has been fascinating. I have to say, from the U.S. end, in terms of my minimal involvement on the U.S. part of this is an incredibly difficult problem. I mean, in terms of the U.S. regulations, for example, we have a concept called equal protections, and the underlying ethical notion is that none of our rules are golden or probably any better than anybody else's sets of rules. So we should be incredibly flexible in terms of accepting other entities' reviews, other countries' rules, et cetera, et cetera. The problem has been even on our side, and I know in terms of my office, we've gotten quite a bit of legitimate pressure in terms of let's come out with rules implementing that, because we have that as part of our rules, yet we've never actually found there to be equal protections. And I would say that's largely for internal administrative issues in terms of getting all parts of the US government on board in terms of what is viewed as a complicated issue. Precisely because of all these notions of when do you accept another country's, or again another organization's rules, whether other countries around the world are having similar problems. Again, I know less about that, but I know this is one of the most frustrating things on my end, that in spite of having dealt with this for many years, we haven't ever found there to be yeah, we haven't found there to be equal protections in any scenario. So it's a very difficult problem.
That is a problem. One of the things, if I recall correctly, Vaso, in your report, is there were two ways to kind of achieve mutual recognition. One was through the procedures, but what Jerry's talking about is that kind of equal protections. So Vaso, how do you see that working in the framework you're putting together?
Yes. So I'm very pleased to see Jerry on the call, and Jerry, nice to virtually meet you and others. So there are two of these regulatory statutes, if you will, that lay at least the foundation for a type of establishing reciprocity. So that's that second condition. And so one of those is the equal protection clauses in the common rule. Canada has a very similar recognition of others' research ethics review decisions for international research. So these are two countries in which, again, a sort of regional pilot might actually be afforded, or at least the opportunity to pursue that could be an option. And others have written about this. Eric Meslin, who now works in Ottawa in Canada, had written a report, a really wonderful actually paper on establishing, reciprocity across the 49th parallel is how they call it. But these kinds of regulatory, very almost like silent regulatory statutes could be taken advantage of. And I haven't done a deep dive, and this report doesn't do a deep dive into the regulations of other countries, but I venture to guess that one of the ways that we might move forward, in addition to creating this registry, which is not an original, path forward or action item. This has been called on by the WHO and other agencies to establish this kind of registry before, is to do that deep dive into the regulations to see whether there might be equivalents of that statute and others. So I think this would take that sort of deep dive into the regulatory authority and rules to experiment.
Okay, but let's ask Roxana or Sophia. Suppose Chile and Peru, they're close in many ways. Suppose they want to do mutual recognition across borders, let's say for a COVID-19 vaccine, so Chile reviews, first Sophia and her group, or her ethics committee review, right? And then Peru is going to recognize that review as being valid in Peru. Can that work?
May I say something about that?
It's your ethics committee that made the review.
No. I will say it should, but in the real world, it would not. Because, for example, within my same country, that we more or less know each other, really we don't trust in the review that the other committee has done. So we want to do our own review because we can see, I am talking generally, not specifically for myself, but we consider that there are some local things related, for example, with who is the PI, which is the competence that he or she has, and so on, that will make more difficult to have this review equivalence. And at least within my country, we already know that if the first IRB says no to the project, you take that project and present to the other IRB that is more light in the review that will say yes. So if within a country we don't have really equivalence, it will be more difficult to have it within other countries.
Yeah, but I'll just push it further. Even if you had equivalents in your countries, like let's say we have that in some European countries and we're working towards that in other European countries. So let's say we get a kind of equivalence, okay, within a country. I still have the question, how could a review in Chile ever be reviewed as an equivalence in Peru? Because I see two roles for the ethics committee if I follow ICH TCP. The first role is to protect the research participants, okay? And the second role, which is in the IEC definition, but not the IRB definition, is to provide public confidence of that. And that's also written into European law. So how can you ever have a committee in Santiago de Chile giving a decision that the people in Peru will accept, because it's a specific role of the ethics committee to provide that public confidence and to provide the protection of those research participants, the ones in Peru. So how do we get over that if we want to come to something like what Vaso is presenting us with, mutual recognition?
I will suggest that at least at the beginning, we can sit members of IRB from Chile, Argentina, Peru, whatever the countries, the region, and discuss one single project, for example, a vaccine trial. And once they have agreed regarding that protocol, it will be much easier to have the local committees in each of the country said, okay, there is only one approval enough. Because there are some things, for example, it could be regulatory issues different within the countries. I will say something stupid. In my country, you are adult at 18 years. In another country, it could be 21 years. In some countries, due to cultural reasons, you need that for research being done in a pregnant woman, you need the partner consent as well. Or in some countries, for research done in a small child, you will need that both parents sign. So unless you have some common grounds on these issues, I think it would be difficult. I'm not saying it wouldn't be important to have one. And also, as we discussed with Vaso, I think that from the southern perspective, we still think that the northern would like to have one only review, but it will be the review done in the north countries. And probably that will not be acceptable unless we are really equal.
Francis.
Yes, Nielsen, yeah.
May I say something about this issue? Rosana is not there, so Peru cannot be represented by now. But anyway, I wrote something about our system here and the multiple center studies need to have the approval, the first approval in the country that proposed that research. I think it's the same in all the world. So for me, Peru should have this evaluation. If so, we could have a second evaluation for region IRB. I don't know, but I think having this idea of a global evaluation, we should consider all the difference, all the cultural difference. So it would be a kind of just a very deep concept we would check. And then each country or region would check the cultural and legal ones. Here in Brazil, we have a guideline related to multiple center that we have at local be the first, and from one study that came from US. So this center make all the evaluation. So we needed a second evaluation by the National Commission of Bioethics. Even, well, we have these two evaluations. Then we have 15 centers that are going to be included. We would have all those IRBs evaluating the same protocol. And they will evaluate if the researcher is expert on this area, if he or she have the institutional approval, and if the institution have condition to conduct this protocol. So if any of these 15 centers find some change, they can send to National Commission a alert to change it. So it's a dynamic process. IRBs together to the National Commission of Ethics on Research do. So we have a very, very safe or very tight evaluation. So we could do the same for a global condition, have a deep analysis for main concepts for sure, and then give the chance all the center involved to do their own analysis, because sometimes one thing can be lost for one but not for others, so we could cover all the aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nilsa. I think that concept is also in Vasso's report to a certain extent too, which hasn't seen the light of day yet. But in fact, you and Vasso should talk sometime. That would be very good, because what you say, especially in the context of the Brazil situation, I think is relevant. But let's try this idea on. I mean, I'll get myself in trouble. Nobody will get myself thrown out of the international ethics world. But suppose we look at what SIAMS has done with this idea, as you mentioned, the sponsor country and the host country, right? And you say, well, yeah, you'll never have a protocol that's not reviewed in the sponsor country and the host country. Well, that's in fact not true, right? If there's a protocol that comes from Pfizer in the US and comes to Belgium, right? It's never reviewed in the US first. Or if it comes from Janssens in Belgium and goes to France or to Germany, it's never reviewed in Belgium first. So we only have this, and this goes back to, I think, what Sophia is saying. We only have this idea of sponsor and host country between countries we see as being unequal or being one having more capacity, let's say, than another country, which we do on economic terms, but not might have nothing to do with the ethics committees in those countries. It might be the complete opposite, in fact. So really, the first step, I think, could be to try to get over and to eliminate in the next edition of the SIOMs this sponsor and host country, so that all countries, we can say, we feel have the capacity that they need to have to protect their own populations or to have the ethics review that's required for their own populations, for their own healthcare systems. So you're right. So I go away from your topic. I understand what you mean. You want to have one committee that will do like a really deep dive into the whole of the protocol and everything that's concerned with it. And then other committees can look at that protocol as it's appropriate to their site, to their investigators, to their patient populations. But I think one of the places to start is to get rid of the entire distinction between host country and sponsor country. Yeah.
So both would be in this document. The host and the proposal. So here we have this approval. Even the company is not going to do in their own country, but they need to have a analysis of the ethical issue of. That's my point. Thank you. They would do with their own population. That's the question.
Yeah, that's the question. I agree. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're losing people quickly because we are trying people's patience. I know. Does anybody else want to say anything? Vaso, do you want to say something about this? It's in your report, but I don't want to put you on the spot too much either. Yeah.
No, just to say how enriching these conversations have been and really energizing in the sense that everybody seems to be identifying similar barriers and similar optimism for working together. And ultimately, that's the first step. So just to say how exceptional this conversation has been. And the report, once available, will be made publicly available on the WHO and I believe the COVID-19 coalition website towards the end of the month.
Yeah, and there's discussion in the chat. Thank you, Jerry, for filling that out with on top of what Sophia said. Alif, I jumped all over your webinar today. I apologize. Do you want to close us out and get us to Lawrence? Because I know everyone just comes to listen to Lawrence anyway, but yeah.
Yes, I've seen Lawrence taking lots of notes during the presentations and discussions. So I'm sure he's going to offer us a comprehensive summary of what we have all talked about. And if it is okay for you, Lawrence, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me though?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. It's been a long day. Everybody is well behaved until Francis went and came back and then threw us all out and made people want to run away. But going straight to the task, we had Prof. Saelif, who chaired the meeting, introduced the reasons for the webinar today, and went on to Dr. Catherine Lederer, who gave us some ideas about the guidance and the background of her talk. She had presentations shown on, and I will just due to lack of time, just mentioned the bullet points. She mentioned about the background of her talk, talking about no treatment of vaccines being very essential in the research world now, and countries have different levels of preparedness for rapid review, and ask what can we learn from this, among other things that she mentioned in the background. Then he went to the lessons from previous outbreaks, and that time sensitivity, there is a quality of review versus time taken to review, which needs to be looked at, and ensuring protection of participants in clinical trials, recommendations of WHO alert workshop, and rapid sharing of data were also things that she mentioned about, and talked about WHO emergency SOPs that was produced within a report, which is already published in May, and that there are 20 recommendations to facilitate rapid review. She also mentioned about the key recommendations, which are also published in there and needed to have. We talked about the review of timeframes and protocols to be sent to reviewer within 24 hours, and WHO response timelines. They normally have weekly meetings, and that there's an ad hoc ethical review committee for COVID-19 called SEC, and mention the reasons for forming SEC and have diverse submissions. He also mentioned about key challenges, some of which are lack of independent mechanisms for robust scientific review and confusion related to parallel systems of review between the ethical review committees and SEC. Then there are key successes and lessons that they learned, some of which were positive outcomes, lessons going forward, proactive communication and personalized service. Important to have all standard ethical review committees, and then there were outstanding issues that were brought up. And she gave us a snapshot for the future and had conclusions in her presentation by mentioning that there still exists some confusion between interplay and need for more than one mechanism for review, that there's value of preparedness, which is critical, and need to start consolidating the lessons of COVID-19 now. How to build on great work coming out of ethics committees and systemize change, and mentioned that there's a PEFRAN results database. Professor Morinica gave an introduction and said there is a surge in research since the pandemic. There's the capacity needs for ethics committees in West Africa for COVID-19 protocol. And there were about 6 countries: Senegal, Guinea, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria. And then they mentioned about the findings, which include countries affected by Ebola, which were ahead in preparing ethics code for COVID-19 responses. And these Ebola affected countries were Nigeria, Senegal, and Guinea. And that there are new ethical rules of engagement with online research conduct. Said that there is a need identified among the West African countries, and some of which are training for researchers and health profession, improved communication between stakeholders, the need for more local trials to be conducted during pandemics, and how do IRBs conduct its monitoring rules, and strengthen relationship between IRB and regulatory bodies, and that there are new vulnerabilities as well. We then moved to Dr. Ana Palmero, who says we are still learning in Latin American countries, and ethics committees were not very welcomed in certain ways by the government. There's a lack of experts at the beginning, and economic challenges also make it difficult for ethical committees over there, and that they've created new ethics committee boards. Committees have adopted their own guidelines with or without government guidelines. And then there are regional meetings conducted to share ideas. And they also have their own key challenges. And some of them are processes to enable efficient communication, collaboration between researchers and committees, supervision of ongoing studies, community engagement strategies. But the most important point she made was that resources and formal recognition of the work of the committees by the authorities is lacking, and not they need the government's help not only during pandemic but ordinary times as well. Dr. Rahim Zadeh, preliminary findings of studies supported by WHO was elaborated, gave an executive summary of the findings, and mentioned that there's a consultative activities by type, and there's also the consultative activities by region, and gave some highlights, which including developing procedures, international guidelines, consultees and reciprocities are things to be looked at, and then local research committees and centralized committees are also things to look for. And there were, and she appreciated all the organizers. Then after that, we had discussions now where Francis said he thinks that the presentations are great, and how are we going to go forward? The preparedness is essential and it's urgent. Instead of going from COVID after COVID and COVID, this is the time now to consolidate our efforts well. Rahim Zadeh said there are similarities and dialoguing was very important among the regulatory bodies. Senad Kebede from Ethiopia mentioned that national structures are working together and changing attitudes. It becomes important to elevate these discussions to national levels and get things into medical schools, for example, and other institutions. Francis then mentioned that there is a need for international discussions, but we need more within the individual countries to be strengthened. And best practices have to come from to interactively getting everybody together within the countries and among countries. Elena said it was very interesting and important discussions between everything that is going on among people and the countries. Francis then said that we don't know where the ethics committees are in the world, and he thinks that we need some mapping for these ethics committees to be found out and then put together as a good documentation. Anna said researchers, health officers, and others need to be engaged with the ethics committees so that they know what the ethics committees are doing and the challenges they are having. They also need to know what the health officers and researchers are thinking about the ethics committees. Dr. Edda was a member of the ethics committee for Ebola, and he said they proposed and used a system called MURI, which is a monitored emergency use during pandemics or emergencies, and that patient treatment and ethical requirements, as well as emotional considerations, are very important issues. Professor Robert said he couldn't comment much about other countries. Jerry says this is a difficult concept and thinks we need to be flexible in the way to go. And other countries have similar or differing problems. Rahemzadeh already again said regulatory guidance could be taken advantage of and may need deep diving into it to ensure that things are not taken advantage of. Sophia said that we may not trust the review of other countries that has done so, and therefore they may in their own country need to do another one. It is hard to say, but it will be difficult to take the review from other countries unless they think it is equivalent. Francis is still worried about mutual recognition. Sophia thinks things are different in different countries. So unless there is a common ground, it will be difficult to do things unless there is equality from all angles. Nilsa thinks that we can have a second evaluation, but need to consider all cultural differences if things are to be smoothly accepted without much problems. And one thing can be lost by one committee, which can be picked up by another committee, So it is important to work together as well. And Francis says we need to remove this sponsor country and host country relationships and differences. That's about what I could gather for today. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you so much, Lawrence.
Welcome.
Thank you to everyone. Lawrence, fantastic summary. Thank you very much. It's so important because you remind us of what we said, and you help us to remember. And remembering even in the immediate moment is important. So it's really good. And of course, you do it in such a beautiful way, in such a generous way too. So it's really good. Elif, thank you for sharing.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
We missed Professor Valerie from Belarus, and that's a big miss. Mm-hmm. Their ethics committee is something amazing, just amazing. And it plays a really significant role in their society. And plus, Professor Valerie is also part of the whole Eastern Europe, Central Asia group there. So we will get them back in. We will get them at a later date here. That's a big loss. But yeah, I mean, firstly, a huge thank you to Elif, and then a thank you to Catherine, to Anna, to Marinika, to Vasos for putting this discussion out there in such a good way, really clear, doing it with very short time. And, you know, I think for me, this is one of the, we always have good talks here, but this is one of the, we hit on a really big point here about, you know, what the role really is of ethics committees generally. You know, if we talk about the role of ethics committees at the national versus the international level, we're really talking about what the role of ethics review is. And that's the key element here. And I think to a certain extent, we have to preserve that role. We have to protect that role. Because ethics committees are, and Jeff is, I see him shaking his head, yes, ethics committees are, they come in, they're in a difficult place in society. There's so many forces that act on them, and they need to be protected. So yeah, I'm talking too much. Jeff, do you want to close? You're new here, so Alif, I think we should let him close, right? He's put him on the spot and let him close this discussion, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Francis, for the opportunity to speak. Yeah, I just want, if I say anything at all, I just want to say that I had this has been a really, really enriching webinar. So the first one I've attended, and I'm really glad that I'm here today, because a lot of the issues and challenges that we've been discussing over the past 2 hours are things that I've been thinking about deeply. And so having a community where we can sort of share our thoughts and opinions, some of the challenges we've experienced, I think for one, at least lets me know that I'm not alone. But two, I've also been able to take away a number of important insights into sort of, how I can approach the challenges related to research ethics more broadly in my own work. And so just a huge thank you to you and to the panelists and to everyone here today for the really enriching and insightful contributions. I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the next webinar. Thanks. I think you're on mute, Francis.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Francis, you're on mute.
I think you're still on mute.
Francis.
Francis, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. No, I did. I wanted to say, I said to Alif, I think, Alif, we couldn't have found a better way to close. Huh?
Yeah, you're right. Very well said.
Yeah. So, yeah, we don't, everybody doesn't get a chance to speak today because I talk too much. But Seyfik, so good you're here still with me. Robert, I'm so sorry I introduced another Robert in the world who probably doesn't even exist, but I'm really happy you're all here. And do come back if you have nothing to do on a Thursday, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Do come back and keep us company. And we have good people here. We have good people here, and we try to think a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Alif, final word, and then I'm going to close this meeting because otherwise people will never do any work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for putting us all together, Francis. You are the reason why we are all here. And this was really a very, very good webinar, not because I chaired it, but because because the presenters were all good and the discussion was very enriching. So that's all from me, and I'm hoping to see everybody in the next meeting. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.